Throughout the history of the United States, we have come up with some amazing things that we should be proud of. And I firmly believe that the best idea America has ever had was creating the national parks. The concept of setting aside land for the preservation of the environment and wildlife living within is absolutely beautiful. And it all started here on March 1st, 1872. Yellowstone National Park became not only the country's first national park, but the world's. It would go on to inspire other countries to create their own national parks, and that was just one of the many reasons I couldn't wait to visit Yellowstone with my brother for the very first time. The following footage was shot between 3 separate days on our more than 4,200-mile road trip across 7 states in the northwestern and upper midwestern United States. Throughout our time here, I really started to understand why this place in particular inspired the creation of the national parks. Yellowstone, of all the parks I've ever been to, simultaneously felt the most wild and most peaceful at the same time. At 3,471 square miles, its area is larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. The spaciousness of Yellowstone is what I believe the reason is to why it feels so wild. Even though the park received 4.9 million visitors in 2022, the third most of any national park and more than 8 times higher than the entire state of Wyoming's population, it really didn't feel so bad. Unlike some other national parks that have their one focal point, Yellowstone has like 20 different focal points that are must-dos when visiting, and it allows the people to disperse. Obviously, sites like Old Faithful and Grand Prismatic Spring are going to be a bit busier, but there are so many hidden gems at Yellowstone that I can't wait to highlight for you guys. There really is so much to talk about, so let's get started with a basic understanding of the park's location. Yellowstone National Park is situated in the northwest corner of Wyoming, extending slightly into Montana and Idaho. It's part of the South Central Rockies ecoregion, meaning yes, it does indeed have some sharp elevation change. A common misconception is that Yellowstone is flat, but we'd go on to do some hikes here that absolutely prove that as false. Now you may be wondering, where does the name Yellowstone come from? Well, it's no secret that there is a giant supervolcano lying beneath the park. How else do you explain the fact that Yellowstone has the largest geothermal area in the world, fully half of the Earth's entire collection? The supervolcano is the largest on the planet right now and has had a troubled past, erupting 3 times within the past 2.5 million years, with the most recent eruption taking place 664,000 years ago. While theoretically possible for a Yellowstone super eruption to occur today or tomorrow, scientists claim that it's exceedingly unlikely to happen anytime in the next 10,000 years. I say this not to scare you, since frankly we don't have anything to worry about, but instead to give some context to the incredible amount of geothermal activity occurring at present-day Yellowstone. With more than 10,000 hydrothermal features alone, the most extraordinary collection of springs, mud pots, fumaroles, and geysers call this place home. In fact, more than half of the world's geysers can be found here, which is the focus of our first day at the national park. Yellowstone's Upper Geyser Basin is the most densely concentrated geyser region in the world, featuring the iconic Old Faithful and more than 150 other geysers. Amazingly, the National Park Service is able to give an approximate estimation on when the most active geysers in the basin erupt. Old Faithful in particular is said to erupt about every 90 minutes, and because of how reliable and frequent it is, there's simply no arguing that it's the most famous geyser in the world. Old Faithful's eruptions can vary in height from 100 to 180 feet, with an average near 130 and 140 feet. It can also vary in eruption time, with the average lasting between 1.5 to 5 minutes. Unfortunately, we had a pretty unlucky first eruption at Old Faithful, with it lasting below the average at just about 45 seconds, and it not going anywhere near as high as it normally does. This didn't bother us that much, since we'd planned to spend at least the first half of our day walking around the basin anyways, checking out the springs and other geysers that may be erupting that day. The boardwalk trail navigating the basin is absolutely wonderful and starts by taking you right along the Firehole River. This river snakes its way through the area, and in many cases it's impressive to see geothermal features with a drop-dead gorgeous river in the background. This is also where we got to see our first bison, arguably the most iconic symbol of the park, even appearing on Wyoming's state flag. The bison here are the most important herd in the United States. Yellowstone is the only place in the country where bison have lived continuously since prehistoric times. Unlike most other herds, the population here is allowed to roam freely over the expansive landscape of the national park. This has resulted in a successful restoration of a population that was on the brink of extinction just over a century ago. Today, more than 5,900 bison live in Yellowstone, and there is a 99% chance you will see multiple herds during your visit. Now, back to the Upper Geyser Basin. This place has some of the most spectacular color patterns you will ever lay your eyes on. Take the Morning Glory Pool, for example, with its deep green, yellows, and oranges. To avoid redundancy, I'm not going to name every single spring pool or small geyser we saw during our long walk around the expanse. But what I will say is this was an absolutely incredible first impression of Yellowstone, and I think the footage can speak for itself. Not only did we have the chance to see some amazing springs and smaller geysers during our walk, but we were lucky in that we were able to see one of the area's most prevalent geysers, the Castle Geyser, erupting as we were walking nearby. This timing is not something we had planned for, but Castle Geyser was awesome. Funny enough, I don't think we even saw it at its best since it ended not long after we arrived. But still, this was totally awesome to see. Our second eruption at Old Faithful was soon approaching, and we were optimistic we'd see better results this time. What we'd experienced the first time was already unlikely, and twice in a row seems borderline impossible. Our crowd had great energy just before the eruption, which really got me in the mood. This is a great way to pass time. I like it. And sure enough, we got to see Old Faithful in its full glory this time. The eruption lasted a lot longer, and it shot up to noticeably greater heights. While not my absolute favorite geyser in the park, Old Faithful did live up to the hype for me, and I absolutely loved this experience. After looking on my phone for any more potential eruption predictions, I noticed that the Grand Geyser had the chance to erupt within the next 3 hours. Since I had heard this one was pretty spectacular as well, we decided to go for it, and we definitely didn't get lucky when it came to timing. I believe we waited more than 2 hours before Grand Geyser finally erupted. That was without any food, and believe me, we were starting to get very hungry. Now, there was food available for purchase at one of the nearby lodges, but I personally got the feeling that if we got up, left, and came back 20 minutes later, we'd miss the eruption. So I think we just settled with the fact that this could be a brutal couple hours, but hey, we're at Yellowstone, we've got to see this thing. To say the wait was worth it would be a serious understatement. Grand Geyser was amazing. It lasted for such a long time, and it had such a unique blast, erupting less in a vertical line like Old Faithful, but a bit more up and outward, with a secondary small geyser to the left also doing its own thing. In addition to the incredible Upper Geyser Basin, another popular spot to visit at Yellowstone is the Midway Geyser Basin. If that doesn't ring a bell, Grand Prismatic Springs should. By far, that's what this basin is most well known for, but it's also home to a few other geothermal pools as well. Now, there are 2 ways to see Grand Prismatic Spring in dramatically different ways. My favorite was viewing it from the Grand Prismatic Spring Overlook, which you can access from the Fairy Falls trailhead. To just do this is a 1.5 miles out and back, or you can extend your hike and continue to Fairy Falls in a 4.8-mile out and back hike. That is what we did, and it's 100% what I'd recommend. The overlook for Grand Prismatic Spring is absolutely amazing. You see all these different colors in a spring larger than all of the others in the park by far. I think it's one of the must-see things at the park, and if you proceed to Fairy Falls, it's just a no-brainer that you have to do this hike. Honestly, the hike itself to Fairy Falls really isn't that exciting, with a little to no change in scenery as you make your way through the forest. Not to mention, the amount of mosquitoes out made it pretty unbearable, so we ended up jogging through the entire trail there and back. We later get bug spray while we were in Montana, but if you get the chance to buy some before arriving at Yellowstone, do that for sure. Despite the Fairy Falls trail not being all too interesting, the payoff was absolutely incredible. While it may not look that big on camera, Fairy Falls is a monolith standing 200 feet tall. But I say that, it's also a very gentle waterfall, and I think that's why the name Fairy Falls was so fitting. I often wonder where people get the names for these waterfalls, since a lot of them don't line up, but this one does. I think more than most waterfalls I've seen, Fairy Falls is a heck of a lot more impressive in person than on video. So if you're looking to get your waterfall fix while visiting Yellowstone, this is one that I'd absolutely recommend seeing. You may have noticed the people walking along a boardwalk trail from the Grand Prismatic Spring Overlook, and that's what we were off to see next before ending out our first day in the park. This is a very iconic thing to do here, so I think I had expected it to be better than it actually was. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed the trail, but you don't really get that good of a look at Grand Prismatic Spring. Honestly, my favorite part was crossing over the Firehole River again and seeing the runoff water from the spring create these small waterfalls. The colors behind them that the geothermal activity is able to form are crazy. But that wrapped up the first of 3 fantastic days spent at the park. As you can see, that one was more about geyser watching and checking out the geothermal activity, but there is so much more to Yellowstone than just that. The following day would be mostly devoted to the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, one of the most spectacular natural wonders I have ever seen. But first, we'd make a quick stop at Artist Paintpots to start our morning. The Artist Paintpots trail is a 1.1 mile loop, though the final portion was under construction during our visit, making it an out and back trail. Nonetheless, it was well worth stopping to see what very well may have been one of my favorite geothermal features in the park. The mud pots, something we didn't get to see the day prior, were very impressive. It bubbles due to a variety of gases escaping through the wet clay mud, different from other bubbling pools in the park that bubble thanks to heat provided by the magma system in the Yellowstone supervolcano.
It looks like paint.
In addition to the mud pots, the trail showcases several other springs and small geysers as well. Anyways, with how eager we were to see the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, we started to make our way over to the first of many overlooks. This unbelievable canyon expresses the park's complex geologic history in dramatic colors better than possibly any other location in the park. Like other canyons, it formed over a long period of time when the Yellowstone River carved down more than 1,000 feet. The incredible color of the canyon came as a result of geothermal activity, hydrothermally altering rhyolite and other sediments. At the head of the canyon is the lower falls of the Yellowstone River. At 308 feet, it is the tallest waterfall at Yellowstone, and it's just an unbelievable sight. There's lots of different advantages you can get of it, from distant vistas to what the park calls the brink of the falls. Similar viewing opportunities are present for the often overlooked upper falls of the Yellowstone River as well. This one stands just 108 feet tall, but similar to the lower falls, the volume of water flowing down the river is remarkable. With nothing left for me to say, the following video compilation took place at the following overlooks: Inspiration Point, Artist Point, Upper Falls View, Brink of the Upper Falls, Brink of the Lower Falls, Lookout Point, and Grand View. I'd recommend all of these if you want to visit the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, as each are amazing in their own distinct ways. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone is absolutely incredible, and just as you'd think it would be impossible to top, next up we'd be navigating to a place called Lamar Valley. The drive along the way brought us to extreme heights, and I really wasn't expecting it. The mountain scenery began to get a lot more impressive, and the amount of unique wildlife sightings increased. It started with this large fox that we saw run across the road. Totally didn't expect to see something like that here. On the way to Lamar Valley were also a few stops we made to see some places we may not be near for the remainder of the trip. Tower Fall, a 132-foot tall waterfall, was definitely a pleasant stop, but more of an afterthought in the grand scheme of things. Same could be said about the Calcite Spring Overlook, but it was another location that highlighted the impressive yellow color along the Yellowstone River. I wouldn't suggest skipping either of these spots, even though, once again, they are more of an afterthought. Soon we'd come up on Lamar Valley, which is this super expansive section of the park that might honestly be my absolute favorite. I couldn't name very many places more green than this, with rolling hills and mountains galore, rivers and creeks at every corner, and don't even get me started on the wildlife. Lamar Valley is famous for being the best place in the park to watch wildlife. If I had to take a guess, we probably saw upwards of 200 bison at least. Not to mention the pronghorn, which we got to see for the first time here. The pronghorn antelope is the fastest land mammal in the Western Hemisphere, and indeed they love running around. We had some amazing close encounters with all sorts of animals here, and I will never forget how magical it was watching herds of them with the perfect fairy tale-like background of Lamar Valley. To wrap up our second of 3 days at Yellowstone, we'd be checking out Mammoth Hot Spring, located right along the border between Wyoming and Montana. This is the most prevalent part of the park for travertine terraces. These are hot springs that rise up through limestone, dissolve the calcium carbonate, and deposit the calcite, forming these super satisfying rock formations. It's easily the least talked about of the big 5 types of geothermal features readily visible in the park. The others, if you're wondering, are springs, geysers, mud pots, and fumaroles, but honestly, the terraces might be some of my absolute favorites. Mammoth Hot Spring was unlike anything I'd ever seen, and it was easily navigable thanks to an elevated boardwalk trail. This allows you to walk on top of and alongside the formations. Now, there are 2 terraces that really stood out to me. The first was the Jupiter Terrace, due to its incredible display of color. It sort of looked like a bunch of pancakes stacked on top of each other. The second was the Lower Terrace, probably the symbol of Mammoth Hot Springs just because of how satisfying it looks. It's all white and has so many layers stacked on top of each other. Once more, Mammoth Hot Springs are a must-visit area of the park. A full week later, after navigating the rest of Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, and eastern Montana, we came back to Yellowstone National Park for one final day. This would be focused on the park's mountains, which I saved until the end of the trip to give the snow in the higher elevations a bit more time to melt. This is the same reason we'd saved nearby Grand Teton National Park for the end of the trip. The hike on today's roster was the Avalanche Peak Trail. This is widely considered the park's most impressive mountain hike, and I can certainly understand why. The trail is 4.5 miles out and back with more than 2,000 feet of elevation gain. This makes the hike quite difficult, especially towards the end, as it is an absolute grind on the legs. The trail begins in the forestry right along a creek before opening up as you get closer to the higher elevations. From here, you'll start to see some nearby mountains peer their way through the trees, and the views really only get better and better until you reach the summit. That said, victory wouldn't be handed to us easily. Not only was the elevation gain brutal, but the amount of snow patches we had to cover added an obstacle to the hike I wasn't really expecting. Fortunately, they all seemed to be padded down, meaning they were navigable without snowshoes when we visited at the end of June. The trail then narrows in once more with steep drop-offs to the left-hand side. It's important to take this part slow, especially once things start to get rockier and your steps aren't as sturdy. Soon enough, we were able to make it to the summit of Avalanche Peak at 10,568 foot high. The views were absolutely unbelievable, with Yellowstone Lake straight ahead and endless snow-covered mountains to the left. Overall, this was an amazing hike, and it added some incredible diversity to our time in Yellowstone.
Whew, almost there.
To end our third and final day in the park, we'd make a short visit to the West Thumb Geyser Basin, only because it was right on the way to Grand Teton National Park. The trail navigating this basin was a 1-mile loop and highlights not only some more geothermal activity, but also provides some up-close views of Yellowstone Lake. This lake totally reminded me of Lake Tahoe in California and Nevada. It's so clear, so huge, and it makes this basin one worth stopping at. To see just how close the springs and geysers get to the lake is fascinating, and some of the pools here had some of the most vibrant blue color of the entire trip. The black black pool, which ironically is more of a turquoise than it is black, was the star of the show for me. Interestingly, right next to it is the abyss pool, which is actually closer to black, making me wonder if they mixed up the names. But nonetheless, another absolutely wonderful geyser basin gets added to the long list of things we got to see while at Yellowstone National Park. I don't know exactly what I was expecting when coming to this park for the first time. Obviously, I knew I'd see some geysers and I'd see some crazy color combinations in the springs, but I wasn't sure what else Yellowstone had to offer. And to see that it's far and away the most diverse of all of the national parks I've been to was a shock, and it's why Yellowstone is my new favorite national park. I absolutely loved every minute I spent here, and I think that we've only just scratched the surface. There's still loads more geyser basins, mountain hikes, waterfalls, and so many other things that I look forward to seeing when I one day return, because I know that one day I will return to Yellowstone. This is a very special place, and after visiting, I completely understand how it single-handedly inspired the creation of national parks. To anyone watching, if you've considered a trip to Yellowstone before, don't wait, just do it. I hope this video can help make your visit as enjoyable as it was for us. With that being said, there's still loads more that we got to see on this 4,200-mile road trip, so be sure to subscribe and turn on post notifications so that you don't miss an upload. Until next time, I'll see you all very soon. Bye guys.